I was 32 when I first set foot in Cade's new loft. My brother, 34, had just bought the place. Mom sent me a group link. No personal note. No, hey Parker, can you help just a map in a time? Riley, my partner of 3 years, and I showed up early. Boxes cluttered the entryway. A half-assembled bookshelf lay on its side. Cade stood in a polo shirt, phone in hand. The patio door sticks, he called without looking at me. Mind fixing it? I nodded and grabbed a toolkit. Ever since we were kids, I was the fixer. I patched holes in Mom's walls and rebuilt Dad's old bike. Riley knelt beside the door and gave me a worried look. She was used to this, me quietly doing the heavy lifting. Guests trickled in. Mom hovered by the window. Aunt Grace sipped coffee behind her. Nina, Cade's girlfriend, flitted through the group, laughing at his jokes. Her friend Joel leaned against the countertop, texting between sips of wine. I carried folding chairs from the storage closet. I stacked ice at the bar. I cleared plates from the table. Every time I turned around, Cade was posing by the floor-to-ceiling windows. He greeted people with a winning smile, but never asked if we were okay. At dinner, Cade stood in the living room and held up an envelope. I handed him my gift card. $500. He flipped it, said cool, and dropped it on the counter. The glass clinked. I cleared my throat. Brunch tomorrow, what time? I asked. He rolled his eyes. Brunch is for the real family. You're on cleanup duty. Then he smirked at Nina's friends. The whole room erupted in laughter. My chest tightened. Riley's hand found mine, squeezing hard. Mom's eyes flicked to mine, then away. Aunt Grace shifted on her stool. No one spoke up. I picked up a stack of plates and walked toward the sink. The hum of conversation felt distant. My hands trembled. I set the plates down and stepped onto the balcony. The city lights stretched before me. I inhaled deep. The night air burned away the suffocating laughter. I stayed out there until I heard my phone buzz. Then I let the door click shut behind me. I woke before sunrise, the city's glow still muted by the low-hanging clouds. I stood on the balcony, hands gripping the cold metal railing, and watched the horizon's faint blush. Last night's laughter still echoed in my mind, sharp as broken glass. That front door, stubborn and stiff, had been my first task, a symbol of everything I've patched and fixed in this family, doors, relationships, and my own silent ambitions. The air tasted of rain and possibility. I realized then that I was tired of being the quiet hand that held everything together while everyone else got to dance in the hall. I took a breath and let the chill cut through me, awakening something fierce I'd kept under wraps for too long. If I was going to break free, I'd have to risk more than ripped calluses and bruised pride. I'd have to risk the comfortable roles we'd all come to expect. Tomorrow's brunch wouldn't be about muffins or mimosas. It would be my proving ground. Memories of our childhood cabin flooded back, how Cade climbed the rafters to steal birds' nests while I smeared plasters over the shattered window, afterward pretending everything was fine. Mom always said we balanced each other, he the dreamer, me the doer. But underneath, I begged for recognition for a moment, where someone looked at me and saw more than an unpaid understudy in his show. Dad's journal, which I'd discovered in the attic last month, mentioned how he worried I'd one day feel taken for granted. I kept that line hidden. Parker deserves his turn under the spotlight. It felt like treason to brandish it, but it also felt like fuel. The twist was that Cade never read that journal, but the rest of us did, and we all stepped over my name on the way to praise his next big move. I folded the page back and let the memory settle. The unfairness was not just in my mind, it was inked on paper. And if a piece of paper could give me courage, maybe it could also become my weapon. By midday, I knew I had to act. I drafted a message to Uncle Lester, his voice of reason, the one adult who never let Cade off the hook. I typed and erased a dozen times, every word carrying the weight of betrayal and liberation. Fingers hovered over send as I stared at the image of the half-assembled bookshelf in Cade's loft, the same one he'd bragged I didn't lift a finger to build. That shelf symbolized the whole charade, me building the stage, him taking the bows. I hit send with a trembling thumb, confessing what I'd really seen. Beer cans bobbing in the pool, remnants of spilled popcorn in the dining room, Nina's friends treating me like a ghost among them. Hitting send felt like stepping off the balcony without checking for a safety net. My heart drummed. Could I live with the fallout? There was no going back now. I didn't wait long. My phone buzzed with Lester's name. I'll be there tomorrow morning. Relief and dread twisted together. Then came the group chat notification. Cade had posted a photo from last night's party, smiling with Nina captioned, "Great night, setting the date for the big brunch," underneath. I dropped a single line, "I'll join, but it's time to set the record straight." My thumbs hovered before writing more, but I stopped, realizing every extra word could be twisted. So I left it at that. The message delivered the promise of confrontation without revealing my hand. In that silence that followed, I felt a surge of power. I wasn't invisible anymore. Yet the uncertainty clung to me. How would the rest of the family react when the image of the dutiful brother vanished? By late afternoon, the chat exploded. Aunt Grace asked if everything was okay. Mom sent a heart emoji. Cousin Leo laughed it off. Bold move, bro. And then Cade, seriously, you're doing this. I watched the blue bubble hang on my screen, then disappeared. I knew he'd rally his Camp Nina Leo, whoever enjoyed mocking the guy who unpacked boxes. But there was another message buried deep from my neighbor Jenna, whose kids I'd helped tutor over the years. Good for you, it said. Jenna knew me outside of Cade's shadow, and her support felt like armor. I stared at that small line among the chaos and felt something shift. For once, my value wasn't determined by how quickly I could haul trash. It was measured in respect. My knuckles whitened as I tapped out a reply, "See you tomorrow," and ended the chat on my terms. That night, sleep evaded me. Instead, I sat at my desk with Riley's journal open, the pages filled with her sketches and whispered dreams of starting a graphic design studio. She glanced at me, concern in her eyes. "Whatever you're planning," she said softly, "I've got your back." Her faith was the balance I needed, her belief, the counterpoint to every jeer I'd swallowed. I drew a deep breath, picturing tomorrow's brunch table the way Cade would step forward to take the seat of honor. I pictured Uncle Lester's measured gaze, Nina's forced smile, the guests trapped between loyalty and the truth. My hand shook as I traced a line down the page, a silent promise to claim my own chair at that table. Then I closed the journal, the final page creaking shut like a verdict. I was ready for whatever came next. Morning light filtered through the bupshi of the curtains, and I dressed in a simple shirt, no suits, no pleasantries. I clipped Lester's message to my keys, "Be there at 10. Riley grabbed my hand as we stepped out, her palm steadying mine. The ride to the loft was quiet, but my mind buzzed with rehearsed words and unlikely outcomes. Would I find a chaotic scene again, boxes strewn, guests lounging like it was still a party? Or would I discover an uneasy calm, the air thick with suspicion? My stomach clenched, but a fire burned beneath it. This was the risk I chose. As we turned onto the street, I saw the loft's silhouette against the sky, its windows reflecting the dawn. I swallowed, sensing the moment of truth perched on the edge of that threshold. Then I reached for the doorknob and felt the first tremor of change hum through my bones, because whatever happened inside the door would no longer stick. I arrived at the loft just after 10, the golden morning light spilling across the polished hardwood floors. The front door, which once creaked against my hands, swung open smoothly, an omen. I told myself that today would be different. Inside, brunch was laid out on a long oak table, platters of scrambled eggs shimmering with herbs, stacks of blueberry pancakes, mimosas bubbling like captured sunshine. Cade hovered at the head of the table, feigning warmth as he greeted Mom and Aunt Grace. Across the room, Uncle Lester stood quiet, arms crossed, watching everything with those steady eyes that rarely missed a detail. I felt Riley's hand squeeze mine before I stepped over the threshold, unsure of the war I was about to ignite. They seated me 2 chairs down from Cade, wedged between Uncle Lester, my unexpected ally, and Cousin Leo, who gave me a half smile and a subtle nod. Mom slid onto my left, eyes unable to meet mine. The table chatter stuttered as I placed my napkin on my lap. Late afternoon rain threatened outside, clouds drifting against the windows like restless spirits. For a moment, the room held its breath in that fragile calm, neither fully welcoming me nor expelling me. It was the kind of silence that carries more meaning than a shouted apology. A single silence hung heavier than any greeting. Cade nudged his glass toward me as if toasting. "Glad you made it, little brother," he said, voice laced with practiced charm. I lifted my glass of orange juice, my reflection fractured by bubbles. "Wouldn't miss it," I replied, voice steady. The words felt foreign on my tongue, no stammering, no forced laughter. Cade's smile faltered for the first time. I watched him scan the table, searching for an ally. Instead, I saw Aunt Grace's brow furrow in concern and Nina's lips press together. I let the moment stretch, then leaned forward. "Before we eat, I want to address something." Conversation faltered. Silverware paused midair. I realized my accusations landed like stones into a still pond, sending ripples no one could ignore. I cleared my throat. Last night, I wasn't invited here as family. My fingers tightened around the stem of my glass, condensation cool against my palm. I was summoned as the help to haul chairs, clear trash, fix a door I wasn't asked to build. I watched Mom's hand tremble above her coffee cup. Aunt Grace reached out to still it, but I shook off her concern. I've seen empty beer cans floating in the pool, popcorn kernels ground into the floorboards, and guests treating me like a ghost. My voice rose not in anger, but in clarity. And this morning, I called Uncle Lester because I knew he'd want the real picture before handing over the cabin for good. The half-assembled bookshelf in the corner, left from last night's decor experiment, stood as a silent witness. As the last egg fell from my lips, I felt a fracture in the family's perfect facade. The room erupted. Cade's cheeks flushed. Nina gasped and covered her mouth. Leo glanced at Uncle Lester, whose stoic expression finally cracked into a slow nod. Aunt Grace whispered reassurances to Mom, whose eyes brimmed with tears. The buffet clatter resumed, but it was anxious, hurried. Toast was raised, but the liquid trembled. I sat back, breath pounding, as Cade's voice wavered. You went behind my back." He gestured at Uncle Lester. "You accused me in front of everyone." He spun to face the assembled guests, seeking their judgment. "Do you really think this boy would lie?" The guests shifted uncomfortably, some staring at Cade, some glancing at me. In that moment, I saw the wedge I'd driven between them. I stood, letting my chair scrape against the floor with a resolute screech. A single question hung in the air: whose story would they believe? Mom rose too, trembling but determined. She placed her hand on my shoulder, and her voice, usually soft as velvet, cut through the tension. "He's telling the truth." The table stilled. All eyes snapped to her. I forwarded Parker that invite because Cade wouldn't ask him himself. He was ashamed. The confession shone in the hush like a beacon. She met my gaze, her tears glinting. "I couldn't bear to see you left out, so I did what I thought was best." A collective exhale rippled through the guests. The moral fault line had shifted beneath our feet. Her confession was the crack in the dam. Uncle Lester stood then, towering in his quiet authority. He cleared his throat and surveyed the room. "I've seen enough," he declared, voice low but unyielding. "Cade, this cabin isn't yours to squander. You had one chance to respect it and everyone who cares about it. You failed." He turned to me and offered a hand. His gesture more than reconciliation, it was vindication. A hush fell again as guests realized belief wasn't automatic with blood. Social expectations, the unspoken rule that family sticks together now, dangled by a thread. I felt both exhilarated and terrified. I had risked everything on the truth, and it had held. Yet the table looked like a battlefield, alliances shifting like clouds. I wondered who would remain when the dust settled. Before Cade could protest, Aunt Grace raised her glass. "To honesty," she said, voice wavering but proud. The toast felt like a decree. No more staging, no more whispered lies behind closed doors. Glasses clinked with awkward resolve. Nina wiped her eyes and stepped back, shoulders slumped. Leo gave me a wry grin that felt like homecoming. But in Cade's eyes, I saw fury and fear tangled together, a storm about to break. As the final beads of champagne fizzed away, I realized this brunch was not a conclusion, but a crossroads. And in that suspended moment, the loft's windows seemed to watch us, reflecting our fractured family back to us, daring us to choose a path. The question was no longer if I would walk away, but which way I would turn. I drove away from the loft with the echo of shattered brunch chatter still ringing in my ears. Headlights carving through the overcast afternoon like searchlights probing my tangled thoughts. The city streets blurred past each passing building, a mirror for that moment, when Mom admitted she'd hidden the invite and Uncle Lester sided with me. It felt like the narrative of our family had flipped on its head, and I sat on that car seat as if I'd been unmoored from every familiar role fixer, understudy, unspoken shadow. Rain smeared the windshield, dissolving streetlights into trembling beacons as if the sky itself wept for the betrayal and the truth laid bare. I gripped the wheel until my knuckles whitened, recalling Dad's journal entry. "Parker deserves his turn under the spotlight." That single line pulsed in my mind, fueling a fierce resolve I'd never dared to embrace before. The spotlight wasn't just mine now, it was the only place I could stand without fading away. But as I pulled into Riley's driveway, my phone buzzed with an unknown number, and a chill ran down my spine because sometimes the price of claiming your own light is the darkness you leave behind. The text preview read, "You think you've won. You've only started the war." No signature, no hint who'd sent it. My heart slammed against my ribs. Was it Cade warning me, or someone else who still believed family meant unquestioned loyalty? I stared at the screen until the message blurred, feeling the risk coil inside me. I had broken bonds, exposed secrets, and now I was exposed too. Riley found me on the couch, hands damp from dishwater, and asked if I was okay. I forced a smile, but the wariness in her eyes said she'd seen this before, how my ambition could attract unexpected fires. I slid the phone into my pocket and said, "It's nothing," but the words tasted like ash. In that moment, I realized the conflict wasn't only with Cade. It was with every unspoken rule that said I should sacrifice my worth for the sake of illusions. The cabin, the journal, the brunch each had become symbols of the truth I now wielded like a blade. And as the wind rattled the front window, I sensed the next move would require more than courage. It would demand recklessness. Before dawn the next morning, I found myself on the gravel road leading to the old family cabin, its silhouette looming like a relic haunted by our history. Mud clung to my boots as I approached the weathered front porch boards, warped by years of neglect and last weekend's careless revelry. I pushed open the door and stepped inside to find shattered glass from a broken vase, beer cans crushed underfoot, and a single rose petal stuck to the kitchen floor like a mocking emblem of something beautiful left to rot. The cabin smelled of stale smoke and regret, each corner a testament to what happens when entitlement meets abandonment. I remembered how Cade used to sneak in to claim it as his kingdom, but now it felt like a prison he'd turned against everyone who cared for it. At the far end, I spotted Uncle Lester's leather portfolio lying open, the deed still blank, his trust betrayed. I knelt beside it and found a folded piece of paper tucked underneath a ledger of every repair I'd ever made here. Windows, reglazed beams, reinforced floors, sanded smooth. My own sweat and skill cataloged in ink hidden from me until now. My throat tightened as I realized the cruel irony I had built this place and he'd claimed it as his triumph. Clutching the ledger, I knew the next risk would change our future forever. I reached for my phone and dialed the local Chronicle office, my voice steady as I asked for the property records desk. The clerk's polite confusion didn't deter me. I requested every permit, every inspection report, every reminder that the cabin was still Uncle Lester's, not Cade's. Then I left a message for the Chronicle's feature writer hinting at a story of two brothers, a disputed inheritance, and a housewarming that went horribly wrong. It felt like stepping onto a tightrope over a canyon, one wrong word, and I'd plunge into defamation or family exile. But I couldn't let Cade's lies stand unchallenged. By midday, I sent Cousin Leo an email with scanned copies of the ledger and Dad's journal excerpt. "Do with this what you will," I wrote, knowing he might be the first to break ranks publicly. My phone rang with Mom's caller ID a few minutes later. Her voice trembled as she begged me to stop. "Please, Parker, don't make it worse." I inhaled, recalling the fierce clarity in Lester's eyes when he heard the truth. "I'm done replaying old tapes," I replied softly. "I'm not tearing the family apart, I'm saving what's worth saving." When I hung up, the cabin's windows rattled in a sudden gust as if the walls themselves held their breath for what was coming next. That evening, I sat on the porch steps with Riley at my side, the ledger and Dad's journal between us. A single lantern flickered shadows across our path, and we listened to the lake's distant lapping, a steady promise that some things endure beyond human drama. Riley slid her hand into mine and whispered, "You're doing the right thing." Her faith gave me strength, but as darkness settled, I realized the ledger and the journal could only tell half the story. The other half lived in how Uncle Lester, who'd never groomed Cade for this, would act now that the truth was public. The real battle wasn't against Cade's arrogance. It was against entrenched beliefs that family ties trump justice. In our society, bloodlines often cloak betrayal, and I was challenging that. My breath caught when headlights swept across the water and I spotted Cade's truck pulling into the drive, its engine growling like a predator stalking its territory. Riley squeezed my hand. "Here he comes," she said. And in that moment, I understood that standing up for myself meant facing him one last time under these same starlit skies. The boardwalk creaked beneath Cade's boots as he climbed the porch, his face a mask of fury and hurt. He held a half-empty beer, the label peeling symbol of his careless excess. "What have you done?" he snarled, voice rough. I met his glare without flinching, feeling years of invisible burdens transform into a steady flame behind my eyes. "I did what you never would, own the truth," I said, letting the ledger catch the lantern's glow. "Those repairs aren't a favor. They're proof you can't build anything without me." He took a step forward, and the beam above us thudded, a reminder that this cabin, our legacy, could collapse if we didn't choose to rebuild it with honesty. Cade's shoulders jerked as he processed the ledger's pages. "You ruin everything," he spat. The risk coiled in my chest. If I backed down now, everything I'd fought for would dissolve. But if I stood firm, I drew in a slow breath and felt my own heart become the architect of a new foundation. "I saved it," I said, voice low in me. The night stretched between us, charged with the electric hum of possibility and the silent question hanging in the air: could our family survive this reckoning, or would the cabin's walls echo only with our fractures from now on? I woke before dawn, the sky still bruised purple at the edges, and found myself scribbling in my notebook as thunder rumbled over the lake. Rain had begun to seep through the leaky roof, each drop a mocking echo of the cracks I'd exposed in my family's story. My pen traced the words, "I choose truth over comfort." It felt less like a triumph and more like a proclamation of war. My phone buzzed a message from the Chronicle's editor asking if I'd be willing to share my side in a follow-up interview. The offer shimmered with risk, my face, my name in print, laying every secret bare. Yet the same fire that drove me to call Uncle Lester in the first place burned hotter now. I typed back where and when, sealing my commitment to let the world see that entitlement without accountability always sours. As I hit send, the cabin shivered in the wind behind me, and I realized the real storm was just gathering. Late that afternoon, I scanned the weekend edition at Riley's favorite coffee shop. The headline read, "Brother exposes housewarming farce," and beneath it, my quotes about responsibility and respect. I watched patrons glance at the article, whispering over steaming lattes. In the margins of the page, someone had scrawled a question: "What's worse, lies or the people who let them stand?" My heart fluttered relief that the ledger and Dad's journal were finally heard, and terror at how many would judge me for breaking the unspoken rule that family trumps all. The group chat blew up. Aunt Grace begged me to apologize, Leo touted me as a hero, and Mom sent a single pleading emoji. Before I could respond, an unknown number flashed on my phone. "You think you're above this now? No name." Just a line that curled around my courage and squeezed. I set the paper down, feeling the first real weight of my actions, because the moment you shatter a lie, you can't put the pieces back. That evening, I met Jenna, the neighbor, whose kids I'd tutored years ago at a small cafe near the marina. Steam curled from our mugs as she told me how the article had sparked debate among her friends about privilege, about who gets to speak up. "I always knew you were more than the help," she said quietly, her gaze drifting to a painting of a storm-tossed ship on the far wall. The vessel looked battered but unbroken, like us, perhaps. Then her expression shifted. "But Parker, I need to confess something. I didn't hire you just to fix my porch. I paid you in cash because I was ashamed to admit I couldn't do it myself." Her secret tangled with mine. We'd both been trapped in roles dictated by pride and expectation. I felt my convictions tremble. Could I stand for justice if my own values were compromised? Before I could answer, the cafe door swung open and Cade walked in, scanning the room. Heat surged through me, his arrival a twist I hadn't anticipated, and proof that hiding secrets only invites more chaos. By twilight, Mary and I were back at the cabin, flashlights cutting arcs through the gloom as we stomped puddles from our boots on the warped floorboards. The scattered debris, broken glass-soaked pillows seemed to leer at us, symbols of neglect and entitlement left unchecked. I knelt and pressed my palm to a damp board. The wood quivered under my fingers. "We can't just scrub the mess away," I said. "We need a restoration plan, structural, legal, emotional." Mary frowned, her brow creased with worry that my crusade might cost us everything. But when I told her I'd propose a joint ownership agreement to Uncle Lester, my reward for risking everything to tell the truth, her eyes flickered with pride instead of fear. We mapped out a timeline: professionals to inspect the foundation, carpenters for the beams, a lawyer to draft a fair deed. With each detail, I felt a new blueprint of possibility forming. Yet, as we packed up our tools, my phone buzzed again. Lester's text read, "Meet tonight at cabin. Urgent." The night air tightened around us, and I knew the next turn would decide whether this place could ever heal or become the tomb of our old bonds. At sunset, I found Uncle Lester on the porch, the fading light casting long shadows over his lined face. In his hand was the blank deed, crisp and waiting. He didn't smile, he simply extended it toward me. "I want you listed as co-owner," he said, voice low. "If you can restore this place, respecting its history and everyone who built it, you'll have half the title." Relief and apprehension clashed inside me. I'd dreamed of this acknowledgement, yet now it felt like stepping onto another battlefield. My hand shook as I reached for the pen, and Lester's gaze held mine, warning that the offer would vanish if I failed. Just then the door banged open, and Cade stormed in, face flushed, accusing me of orchestrating a media circus to usurp him. He grabbed the deed from Lester's hand, crumpling it. "You can't bribe him with pity and contracts," he roared. My pulse thundered as I wrenched the paper back smooth and whole. "This isn't charity," I said. "It's justice." Cade's lip curled, fury and hurt mingling, and he stormed out again, vowing legal action. The cabin spun in that charged silence, and I realized I'd secured power, but also invited a fight I couldn't yet predict. The next morning, I stood on the porch amid scattered leaves and wrote a to-do list on a scrap of notebook paper. Call the inspector, find an attorney, schedule. Carpenters talked to Jenna about grants for historic homes. Each line felt like a vow I would rebuild these walls and the relationships they sheltered. I tucked the list into my jacket and headed down the path toward the lake where the early light shimmered like a promise. As I walked, I noticed the sapling we'd planted last spring, its slender trunk now bent under the weight of wet leaves, fragile yet rooted deep. It struck me as a symbol of our family battered by storms, but capable of standing upright again if tended with care. I knelt in the damp grass, pressing my palm into the cool earth, promising to nurture what I'd broken and what I'd saved. When I stood my back straight in the morning breeze, I knew the real work was just beginning, and that every nail driven, every board replaced would be a testament to choosing integrity over comfort. But as I rose, I felt the hinge of a door click behind me and turned to see Nina standing in the cabin's doorway, her eyes bright with something I couldn't yet name. Nina's silhouette was framed by the doorway's failing light, her posture hesitant, her expression torn between apology and fear. She held a sketchbook against her chest as though it were both shield and offering. "I'm sorry," she whispered, a voice bare. "I never wanted to lie for him." She opened the book to reveal detailed renderings of the cabin's interior, drawn with love for its original beams and old-growth pine floors. "I've been designing a renovation concept," she said, stepping forward, not to erase its history, but to honor it. My breath caught. Her betrayal had stung, but her art felt like a bridge across the chasm we'd all created. Mary, who'd followed me, drifted beside me and gave my hand a tentative squeeze. In that moment, I saw a path forward where truth and creativity could coexist, where rebuilding walls could also rebuild trust. Yet as Nina closed the sketchbook, determination settled in her jaw. "I know Cade will hate this," she said, "but it's the only way to save what matters." The weight of her words hung between us like a threshold, and I realized accepting her help would mean risking my heart again. The sun dipped lower and the cabin's windows glowed dimly, waiting for our answer, together or apart. I stood on the porch as dawn's first light crept over the pines, the cabin suspended between yesterday's wreckage and tomorrow's promise. Nina and Mary arrived together, the sketchbook and a toolbox cradled in their arms like precious cargo. Uncle Lester waited by the railing, the blank deed in his pocket, and an inspector's stamp of approval clutched in his hand. I felt my pulse drum with both pride and fear. This was the moment we pivoted from accusation to action, from tearing down to building up. Nina unfolded her drawings on the splintered floor, revealing a vision that wove the cabin's original beams into a modern open-plan sanctuary. Mary unpacked hammers and nails, her confidence contagious. Even Lester cracked a small smile as he tapped the deed into my palm. "Sign here," he said, "and we're partners." My pen hovered over the line, the weight of that signature heavier than any ledger or journal entry. I glanced at the cracked threshold, that stubborn door we'd fixed together, and realized that this choice would echo through every beam we restored. With a slow breath, I inked my name and the cabin's fate with it. But as the three of us raised our tools in silent solidarity, a distant rumble of an engine stirred the forest's hush, reminding me that rebuilding would not be without its shadows. The following week, the restoration began in earnest. We hauled creosoted beams and sanded floors until the wood grain emerged like scars turned into stories. Nina's designs guided our hands, her sketches transforming into real walls and windows that framed the lake's tranquil expanse. Mary patched the roof under a sky that alternated between drizzle and a brilliant sun, each drop a baptism for the cabin's new chapter. I navigated the permit process, bargaining with town officials who still whispered about the scandal that branded our family name. They lingered in my meeting with stoic gazes, embodying the social contract that prized harmony over honesty. Every signature on zoning forms felt like a small victory over the unwritten rule that family disputes stay behind closed doors. At night, I pored over Dad's journal by lantern light, seeking guidance in his words for moments when outgnawed at me. The cabin creaked with every gust, but those noises no longer felt like threats. They were reminders that this place was alive and forgiving. Yet as our hammers struck in unison one afternoon, I saw through the open window a figure in Cade's beaten truck parked at the edge of the clearing, and I sensed his eyes watching our progress like a judge poised to overturn a verdict. I confronted him at the tree line, saw the anger etched in his glare as he held a folded piece of paper. Unnamed legal threats, no doubt like a weapon. His voice cut through the air. "You don't own this story," he spat, voice trembling with wounded pride. "Oh, you can't build a life out of my mistakes." I felt the old ache of being dismissed of my worth, measured only by what I could carry or fix, not who I was. But this time, the ache steeled into resolve. I squared my shoulders and said, "This cabin has walls I repaired, doors I rehung, floors I sanded, and it has memories we all own, not just the ones you choose to show." I held up the inspector's approval, the deed now signed by both Uncle Lester and me, and the permit that declared our shared right to build. Cade's face twisted as he realized his threat papers were empty shells, no legal standing, when the rightful owner and his heir stood united. He crumpled the page and tossed it at my feet, then stalked off into the dusk. I watched him go, heartbeat echoing like a drumbeat of triumph, but I also felt the somber understanding that this fight had changed us both forever. By midweek, the final roof shingles were in place and the porch railings gleamed with fresh stain. Nina painted the door a deep forest green, symbol of new growth rooted in the old. Mary arranged potted ferns on the windowsills, breathing life into every ledge and sill. I stood back and took it all in, the cabin, no longer a monument to neglect, but an invitation to community. I emailed Jenna asking if her book club could host their next meeting here, a gesture of gratitude to neighbors who'd worried over generations of our family's dramas. She replied with exuberance, promising her friends would bring scones and conversation. The local Chronicle featured a follow-up piece this time on restoration, reconciliation, and the power of accountability. Comments poured in, some skeptical, some celebratory, but all acknowledging that change demands more than words. At dusk, I sat on the porch with Riley, her head on my shoulder as fireflies danced in the twilight. I felt the cabin's heartbeat in every plank and nail, a rhythm born of honest labor and shared vision. And yet, as we watched the lantern's glow warm the front steps, the soft buzz of a drone camera drifted overhead, mapping our progress for who knows what audience, reminding me that privacy is a luxury and scrutiny the cost of standing up. That night, I dreamt I walked a long corridor of doors, each painted a different shade, each leading to a memory I'd thought lost, childhood summers at the lake, long nights patched with whispered secrets, doors I'd fixed as a kid while Cade climbed roofs. In my dream, the final door was forest green, the hue Nina chose, and beyond it lay an open pasture with sunlight streaming across a field of wildflowers. I opened that door expecting freedom, only to find a mirror reflecting my own face, older-lined by every choice I'd made, every risk I'd taken. I woke with my heart pounding, a tobacco-sweet tang in my mouth. The mirror image followed me to breakfast, uncertainty mingled with pride. Each of us carries a reflection shaped by both scars and repairs, and sometimes the hardest door to open is the one that reveals who we've become. As I dressed for the day, I realized the restoration was more than wood and nails. It was an unveiling of truths I'd long hidden even from myself. The cabin would always stand as a symbol not just of family legacy, but of the courage it takes to face our own reflections in public view. The morning light found me on the dock, casting lines into the glassy water. I tied the new railing posts, admiring the craftsmanship that now held the structure steady. The lake's surface rippled under a rising breeze, each wave a whisper of the past washing into the present. I thought of Cade's final words before he'd driven off, the bitterness that he alone deserved glory. I understood now that glory is not born from solitude but from shared endeavor. As the sun climbed, Aunt Grace arrived with a basket of fresh omelets and coffee, and she slipped an arm around my shoulders, her smile proud and forgiving. "You did the right thing," she said, her voice soft with relief. In her eyes I saw the full circle, the child who patched windows, the brother who demanded to be seen, and the man who rebuilt both cabin and family trust. Yet as we sat on the edge of the dock, breakfast between us, I heard a distant car horn and turned to see Nina waving from the path, sketchbook in hand once more, ready with another idea. It struck me that restoration never truly ends, it simply evolves into the next chapter, waiting for us to write it. That afternoon, we held a small ribbon-cutting ceremony. Cousin Leo played guitar, neighbors brought homemade pies, and Uncle Lester gave a short speech that ended with, "This cabin belongs to the past, present, and future of all who love it." I stood beside him, Mary on my other side, and when the ribbon fell away, applause rippled across the clearing like forgiving waves. I stepped through the doorway, no longer the underappreciated shadow, but a partner in something larger than myself. As I looked around, I saw new faces mingling with old conversations, weaving stories that transcended our recent rift. A child chased a dragonfly, embodying the freedom that honesty can bring. Then, from the edge of the crowd, Cade appeared in the doorway, pale, hesitant eyes flicking between the restored logs, and the community gathered within. In that moment, time stilled. The cabin had become a mirror again, not of my face, but of all our faces, each marked by conflict, each seeking grace. He lifted a hand as if to wave, and I felt the final twist of our story linger in the air. Could the restored walls hold both welcome and warning? And as the sunset painted the sky in ribbons of fire, I realized that rebuilding trust is an open-ended journey. And this ribbon cut, but not severed, beckoned us toward whatever came next. Story 2. I never imagined I'd be the kind of guy pouring my marriage into pixels on the internet. But here I am typing through tears and clenched teeth because writing it down is cheaper than therapy. Dr. Santos says it'll help me heal. She didn't say it'd feel like ripping out my heart, but what do therapists know? My name is Ethan Marshall, and I'm 35. 6 years ago, I married Rebecca Nguyen, 33, the smartest person I've ever met. She could quote case law before she could tie her own shoes. I was fresh out of a master's program in computer science, ready to launch my cloud security startup with my college roommate and business partner, Mark Jacobs. We met on a freezing night outside Park City, Utah. My old Range Rover had died in a blizzard that closed every road in and out. I was stranded, shivering, and 3 hours late for a client pitch in Salt Lake City. Every tow truck was booked. Every mechanic shop was dark except one run by a woman whose name tag read, Becca. She was under pressure cables and frostbite alone in the shop while I froze on the porch. 10 minutes after I climbed inside her dingy garage, Becca popped the hood, inspected the frozen fuel lines, and had me back on the road before sunrise. All she charged me was a coffee and a smile. While I waited for the warm-up, we talked for hours, her voice calm over the hum of idling engines. She was finishing her last year of law school at night and working full shifts as the only mechanic in that town by day. She wanted to move into human rights law, ambitious, gentle, and stunning with dark hair that fell in soft layers across her face. I was sold. That weekend turned into a 6-month romance on long phone calls and snow-dusty visits. When she graduated and passed the bar, she moved to Denver to join a prestigious firm. I set up in a tiny office downtown working around the clock on our beta launch. Mark handled the code. I handled the sales. Together, we built Skylock Solutions, offering zero-trust cloud security to small businesses. Biotech startups, family vineyards, local clinics, you name it. By the time we celebrated our first wedding anniversary, Rebecca was already a rising star at Harrison & Lee LLP, thanks to her sharp mind and softer touch with clients. I paid for her tuition. She cheered me on through every investor pitch. We were a team. Life felt like a symphony in those first years. Friday game nights at Mark's Loft. Monthly dinners with my parents Susan and Robert Marshall at our favorite Italian place. Bike rides on Sundays, or staying in our condo, binge-watching sci-fi shows under a pile of blankets. Even Mrs. Ortiz, our sweet neighbor, would knock on our door with fresh cookies and ask if I'd given Rebecca her birthday card yet. Then January came. It started small. Late nights at the office on Tuesdays. Just Tuesdays always. I chalked it up to a big case she was working on. Law firms eat their young, I told myself. But then the little things crept in. Passwords changed without warning. My desk lamp would click off at midnight even when I swore I left it on. She started taking showers as soon as she got home, leaving towels on the floor and the bathroom smelling of that hotel shampoo she'd never used. And her phone would light up in my pocket with a text that vanished before I could read it. I'm not quick to jump to conclusions. I waited, I watched, and then I did what any paranoid tech guy would do. I logged into our shared banking app. I found recurring charges, 8 straight months at the Marriott downtown, always on a Tuesday for one room. Always fully prepaid under the name Daniel Lee, her senior partner at the firm. Married, 2 kids, the perfect facade. My heart froze harder than that Utah night. I didn't lash out. I collected evidence. PDF bank statements, hotel receipts, a spreadsheet matching her calendar invites to his check-in times. I cross-referenced her working late texts to clients with Marriott check-in alerts. Then I dug up our prenup ironclad infidelity clause section, 8.2b, mutual forfeiture of joint assets. Funny how she insisted on that when my company started booming. I sat on that knowledge for weeks, heart pounding every time the phone buzzed. I still had hope, stupid as it sounds. I wanted to confront her as soon as I had proof, but I also needed the perfect moment. So I waited for a Tuesday. On that 8th Tuesday, I stayed late at our condo, pretending to tinker with code, while Rebecca slipped out whispering, "I'll be back soon." I tracked her with Skylock's VPN logs. Her laptop pinged a Starbucks network downtown at 10:13 p.m. Guess who lives 2 blocks from me? I confronted him first. I showed Daniel the hotel folio on my phone, his name clear as day. He froze, played dumb, then blurted out that he'd been meeting Rebecca to discuss a potential case strategy. His lawyer brain glazed straight over to damage control. He promised me no affair, just innocent late nights. In his apology, he left everything open, texts, emails, all ripe for the picking. That night, I lay awake next to Rebecca's empty side of the bed. I stared at her framed law school diploma, at the wedding photo of us under fairy lights. I wondered when she stopped seeing me in the same way I saw her. What part of our partnership ended up on that Marriott playlist? I called her best friend Priya Patel, who worked in the same office. She was stunned but sympathetic. She handed me more texts, screenshots. He told me he loved her, Priya whispered over the coffee, said he'd leave his wife for her. The next morning, I kept my face calm. I loaded extra files to my laptop. Then while she showered, I transferred every dollar from our joint accounts into safety net accounts only I could access completely by the book thanks to that prenup clause. At 11:43 a.m., I got my answer, a single text. "You're dead to me. I'm taking everything." I laughed louder than I expected. I texted back, "Check your bank balance." 3 minutes later, her shock hit my phone in the form of frantic messages that warned me she'd dispute the prenup. I replied with a photo of Section 8.2b clause, highlighted in yellow. She called. Her voice shook with rage and betrayal. Rage, not sorrow. Rage. She demanded how I could destroy her life, her career. I told her she chose this. She hung up. I leaned back in my chair. I opened Skylock's dashboard. My system logs showed an attempted login from a device traced to her home IP. At 1:17 p.m., I blocked her, changed passwords, locked her out. And then I called the one person I knew would have my back mark. He dropped everything. Said, "You did the right thing." He came over with pizza boxes bigger than my head. We toasted to justice with diet sodas. That evening, my phone buzzed again. 35 unread emails, bank freeze notices. "Dad, you okay from Susan? Thinking of you from Priya? I'll file a restraining order first thing from my lawyer, Angela Ruiz. I'm still here." The condo is quiet. The bed is half empty. I feel every ache in my chest and every pulse in my temples. But I also feel a spark I haven't felt in years. Clarity, control, the simple thrill of standing up for myself. Tomorrow I'll tell her family what I know, and then I'll decide if I want to watch her crash against her own storm or help pick up the pieces. Either way, I'm done waiting. When I dialed Rebecca's parents that evening, my hands still trembled from the adrenaline. I imagined her mother's gentle face the way she'd coo sweetheart whenever I asked about their Buddhist temple's donation drives. And I wondered if she'd ever suspected the storm brewing under our calm. I left a voice message. I told them I had proof of Rebecca's betrayal, that I knew about her secret meetings and the Marriott folios, leaving out only the raw edges so they'd call me back before they judged me too harshly. In that silence after I hung up, I realized I was standing in the middle of my living room surrounded by half-packed boxes and wedding photos. The golden frame of our engagement shot glinted in the overhead light, mocking me with promises I'd already broken. I couldn't decide if I was braver or more foolish for sharing this with her family before confronting her. My phone buzzed her father's number. I answered, my voice caught between remorse and vindication, and heard him say, "Ethan, we need to talk face to face." The line went dead, and I felt that old panic, the first crack in my newfound armor, as I realized I'd just invited an uncharted reckoning into my home. The next morning, I met them at a coffee shop on Colfax Avenue, chosen because nobody would recognize Rebecca's parents there. They arrived like a small parade, her father steadfast and polite, her mother eyes red-rimmed. And then Rebecca's younger brother, Jason, whose presence felt like the unexpected chord in a familiar song. I sat across from them, my palms flat on the table, and laid out the evidence photocopies of charges, screenshots, dates neatly typed on a sheet that felt like a contract with my own heartbreak. Her dad inhaled sharply as though he'd been punched in the gut, and her mom reached out to grip my arm, whispering, "We had no idea." Jason watched me with something like pity, or maybe relief, it was hard to tell. As the coffee cooled between us, I realized how little any of this mattered to the wider world. Our marriage was just another statistic in divorce court, another cautionary tale about ambition and trust. Yet here, between those chipped ceramic mugs and passing baristas, it felt apocalyptic. Her father finally said he'd talk to Rebecca, would try to get her to come home. That word home felt strange. Our home wasn't hers anymore. I stood up, gathering my papers, as her mother begged, "Please don't hate her." Hate wasn't the word flashing in my mind. But as I left them there, murmuring plans and apologies, I saw city buses rumble past carrying strangers to their own dramas, and I felt the hollow echo of a life I no longer recognized looming behind me. Back at my condo, I flipped on the smart lock's camera feed and watched Rebecca's father and Jason drive away in their gray sedan, a motion that felt like an exorcism. I took a deep breath, lightheaded from the confrontation, and realized I'd been holding my breath since last Tuesday. I paced the living room, eyes catching on the giant fractured mirror we'd bought at IKEA for $50, a jagged crack sliced through Rebecca's reflection, leaving my side intact. I remembered pledging vows in front of that mirror, promising to protect her even if the world turned upside down. Now that promise felt absurd. I thought about hiring a private investigator, someone who could predict her next move, but half of me recoiled at the idea of stalking the person who once shared my life. Instead, I opened a fresh document and started drafting emails to our top 10 clients, distilling my apology and reassurance into plain English. I'm resolving an urgent personal matter. Your security is still my top priority. Every sentence bit into me like an admission of weakness, but it was riskier to let rumors fester in the marketplace. As I hit send, the screen flashed delivered, and a new message popped up, a calendar invite titled Family Intervention set for tomorrow at 6 p.m. I stared at it, wondering if I still believed in fate, or if I was just trapped by everyone else's expectations. That afternoon, I slipped into the Skylock office for what felt like the first time since everything blew up. Mark greeted me with a fist bump that almost made me snap and bark at him, but I managed to grin instead. We huddled in the conference room, 3 walls lined with whiteboards scrawled in code snippets, and talked through the emergency plan, rotate our client contacts, rerun vulnerability scans, lock down every token. I watched Mark jot down notes, watched the certainty in his eyes, and felt a surge of something I hadn't felt since launching our first beta determination. When we installed a new multi-factor authentication system on my laptop, I realized it wasn't just an act of professional self-preservation. It was symbolic. I was reclaiming the part of myself Rebecca had tried to hijack. But as the download bar crept toward completion, my phone buzzed again. A news alert, a Denver blog had picked up rumors about an illicit affair at Harrison & Lee LLP. The headline read, Top Attorney's Private Life in Public Crosshairs. I shut my laptop, the new security protocols and client calls forgotten for a moment, and thought if it gets out that the ex-CFO of a security firm can't secure his own life, what's left of my credibility? The barista called out our coffee order, and I realized the real test wasn't in code or contracts, it was in standing up under the weight of public scrutiny. That night, I sat on the balcony with my parents in mind, how they drove 3 hours to hold my hand. How my mom's eyes burned with worry, and I cradled a packet of incense sticks my grandmother sent from Laos. The smoke curled into the dark sky, carrying prayers of protection. I struck a match, lit the bundle, and watched sparks vanish. The ritual felt meaningless and necessary both at once. I whispered into the smoke, I need to believe in something beyond myself. I thought of the temple where Rebecca's family prayed for harmony, wondered if their faith would forgive her, but not forget. My phone glowed with a message from Angela, court date set, evidence briefing, Monday 9 a.m. My heart galloped like a faulty train engine. I realized this wasn't just about property or reputation. It was a clash of beliefs, of vows, broken of the idea that love and trust are sacred. In the distance, a siren wailed, a reminder that in this city, crises never sleep. I exhaled smoke trailing from my lips and braced myself. Tomorrow I'd walk into that courtroom alone, armed only with my truth, and pray it was enough. By Monday morning, my mind had spun itself into knots, replaying every word I'd said to Rebecca's family, every second of the confrontation with her father, the guilt that gnawed at me when I said, I'll never be the same person again. I hated how easily it slipped out like it was the truth. My body felt heavier with each passing hour, like a weight I couldn't shrug off. But there was no going back now. The emails I'd sent to clients, the call to the lawyer, the security breach I'd caught, everything was falling into place. I wasn't just fighting for my business anymore, I was fighting for the core of who I'd been before all of this, the guy who believed in trust and loyalty. The same guy who once thought love was a team sport. I stepped out onto the balcony and looked at the city skyline, trying to feel something beyond the suffocating dread crawling under my skin. In the distance, the soft hum of traffic felt like a cruel reminder that life moved on no matter how much I wanted it to freeze. The court hearing was set for 10 a.m., and all I could think of was how much I hated the idea of walking into that room with Rebecca, or rather the woman who had used every ounce of my trust to destroy me. When I sat down in the lawyer's office later, Angela didn't waste time with pleasantries. She handed me a folder thick with evidence, a mix of financial documents, emails, and texts that painted a clear picture of the woman I once called my wife. But the worst part wasn't the facts. It was knowing that all of this, every strategy, every piece of malicious planning had been created and executed under my nose, while I was busy living a life that felt normal, that felt like it was supposed to be forever. Angela's words barely cut through my thoughts. She spoke about the prenup, the stolen intellectual property, the legal consequences for Rebecca and Justin, And yet I found myself searching her face for any sign that this could be undone, that I could somehow wake up from this nightmare. But there was no reprieve. It was real, and today was the day I would put it in front of a judge. My chest tightened, 1,000 thoughts racing through me. If I stood up in front of that judge, would I feel powerful or hollow? Would I finally be able to shut off the voice in my head that still loved her? Despite everything, I leaned back in my chair and tried to steady my breathing, but it felt impossible. The courtroom would be a battleground, and I was ready to face it, knowing I couldn't hide from the truth anymore. The judge was sitting at the head of a long, sterile table when I walked in. Rebecca was already there, her eyes bloodshot, her lawyer beside her. A thin man with a high forehead and thin lips that never seemed to relax. Justin was nowhere to be seen, which didn't surprise me. He was probably too busy trying to cover his own skin, avoiding the consequences of his own actions. The tension in the room was suffocating, and I could feel the weight of every single lie hanging in the air. The door creaked shut behind me as Angela placed the evidence on the table with a deliberate thud. I caught Rebecca's eye for a split second. The woman who once looked at me like I was her future now stared at me with disdain, her lips pinched in a tight line. The coldness in her eyes made my stomach churn. How did we go from planning a life together to sitting in a courtroom fighting over the scraps of a ruined marriage? The judge barely looked up. He cleared his throat, reminding everyone of the proceedings, but all I could think about was how much I hated this, how much I hated the idea of seeing her in the same room after everything. Rebecca's lawyer spoke first, outlining their side of the case, some nonsense about my business practices, and how I had allegedly hidden assets making this divorce unfair. But I didn't flinch. I knew better than to let those words get to me. I had the facts, and I had proof. My heart pounded harder when it was my turn to speak. The words felt stuck, lodged somewhere between my chest and my throat. Angela nodded at me, a silent encouragement to keep going. I leaned forward, hands gripping the edge of the table, and began. I could feel the eyes on me, the judge, Rebecca's lawyer, and most of all Rebecca, who was sitting there like a stone. I told the story. I told them about the hotel receipts, the fraudulent business plan Rebecca had been crafting with Justin, the way she'd used our lives as pawns in a game that was never supposed to be hers to control. The silence in the room was deafening. Rebecca's eyes flickered, but there was no remorse in her expression. Just cold, calculated defense. And then when I thought I was done, when I thought I'd bared everything, I pulled out the final card. I handed the judge the emails from the Blackstone Ventures executives, the ones that detailed how they'd been in direct communication with Rebecca and Justin for years, working together to dismantle my company from the inside out. Rebecca shifted in her seat, her hand trembling ever so slightly. For the first time in months, I saw a crack in her armor, a flicker of something human beneath her professional facade. The judge sat back in his chair, his eyes scanning the evidence, his face unreadable. The room was still, and for a moment I wondered what it must feel like to have everything unravel so completely in front of you, to have the life you've built, your career, your reputation, your future torn apart by someone you trusted more than anyone else. But then the door behind me opened with a soft squeak and Justin stepped in. His shoulders slumped, his tie askew. He looked like a man who'd lost everything and knew it. His eyes met mine for the briefest of moments, and I swear there was something almost defeated in his gaze. Not remorse, not apology, but a sense of finality, like he realized he had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. The air thickened with tension as he took a seat next to Rebecca. His voice was low when he spoke, but I heard every word clearly. "I can't keep running from this," he said. "I was a part of it all, and it's time I faced the consequences." My heart skipped a beat. For the first time, Justin was owning up to what he'd done. It was a twist I wasn't expecting, but the words that followed nearly made me choke. "Rebecca," he said barely above a whisper. "I can't protect you anymore. You're on your own." The room seemed to collapse in on itself. Rebecca's face drained of color, and for the first time I felt like I wasn't the one drowning. It was her turn to face the fallout. The courtroom felt suffocating, as if the air itself had thickened with the weight of everything that had been laid bare. Rebecca's head was down now, her shoulders slumped, but there was no sign of guilt in her eyes, just the same cold mask, the one I'd spent years trying to pierce. Justin's confession had left the room in a stunned silence, a silence that stretched longer than I could handle. The judge had turned to me, his face an unreadable stone, as if he expected some kind of final statement. But I didn't know what to say. What more could be said that hadn't already been shredded by facts and betrayal? I was tired of explaining the past, tired of defending something that had never really been mine to begin with. tired of this absurd dance of pretending we could fix things when the foundation had been cracked years ago. I glanced at Rebecca, and for a split second, I really saw her as if I were seeing her for the first time since everything fell apart. That thin, fragile woman I thought was my partner, my equal, had become something else, a stranger who had carefully calculated every step of her destruction. And yet there was still a part of me buried deep beneath the anger that wanted to reach out, that wanted to tell her everything could be fixed. I pushed it down. I had no more fight left for that version of her, the one I'd believed in. The moment she made her choice, I made mine. I knew it wasn't over. This courtroom battle was just the start. As the judge called for a recess, I stood up, my legs feeling heavier with each step. Rebecca didn't look up, but I knew she was aware of my every move. The distance between us felt like an ocean now, and I was no longer sure I had the strength to swim through it. The weight of the truth was a burden, one I was only just beginning to understand. Justin caught up to me as I was leaving the room. His face was pale, but his eyes were sharp. There was no doubt now that he was the one who had initiated this fall from grace. "I'm sorry, man," he muttered, his voice barely audible. "I didn't mean for it to go this far." I looked at him, and for the first time I realized how much of a coward he was. A coward who didn't have the guts to admit what he'd done until it was too late. "Save it," I said, my voice low. "You've made your bed, Justin. I'm done." I turned and walked out of the courtroom without another word, leaving him standing there, still tangled in his own web of lies and regret. The cool air hit me as I stepped out onto the sidewalk, the sun dipping low in the sky. Everything was changing, and it didn't seem real. A few days ago, I was in love with the woman who had shattered my world. Now I was just trying to pick up the pieces. It's funny how much can change in such a short time, how quickly everything you thought you knew can fall apart. And yet, in the midst of it all, I felt a strange sense of relief. There was no turning back, no more secrets, no more lies. I was finally free from the weight of her choices, free from the suffocating illusion of control I'd let her have over my life. But that didn't mean I was happy about it. I was still grieving, still caught in the dissonance of it all. The woman I had shared my hopes and dreams with, the woman I thought I'd spend the rest of my life with, was now my adversary. The thought hit me like a punch to the gut. Was this really the end? The ride home was a blur. I barely remembered getting into the car, barely remembered the quiet hum of the engine as I made my way back to the condo. My mind kept replaying every conversation I'd had with her, every quiet moment we'd shared. I tried to hold on to those memories, the good ones, but they felt like ghosts now haunting me from a life I no longer had. I reached the condo, and everything felt alien. The silence of it was suffocating. It used to be our space. Now it felt like a prison, a cage that held my regrets and failures. I dropped my keys onto the counter, running a hand through my hair, trying to clear my thoughts. I knew I had to prepare for the next phase: divorce proceedings, civil suits, and 100 other things I couldn't bear to think about. But there was something else pressing on me, something that had been gnawing at me since the day I found out about her betrayal. What about the business Skylock had been my dream? It was more than a company. It was a symbol of everything I had worked for. Rebecca and Justin had tried to destroy it, to strip away the very thing that had defined me for years. But it wasn't just about revenge. It wasn't just about getting even. It was about proving that I could rebuild, that I could come out of this mess and make something stronger. I wasn't going to let them win. As I stood in the empty condo, the weight of everything hit me in waves. But there was something else underneath it all, something more than just anger, more than just bitterness. There was a determination to move forward, to rise above it. I had to. For myself. For the life I'd worked so hard to build. I glanced at the empty wall where we had once hung our wedding picture, and something inside me cracked. No matter how much I wanted to scream, I stayed silent. The only way forward was to take a breath, face the future, and let go of everything I thought I knew. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't escape the feeling that the worst was still ahead. I had won in court today, but the battle was far from over. There were still loose ends to tie up, still a future to rebuild, and I wasn't sure if I could trust myself to make the right choices anymore. But the one thing I was sure of was that I would never let her dictate my future again. I was done with Rebecca. It was time to take my life back. Tomorrow the real fight would begin.